What's going on, guys? It's MurderInc here, back with another Raid Shadow Legends video, and today I have a really cool one. We're going to be clearing every single stage 25 dungeon with the same 5 champions. Now, I did things a little bit different for this video. I actually used 5 legendary champions, and not to kind of crutch myself for difficulty, it did take quite a bit of time to get this done. As we know, stage 25 dungeons are no joke. They are all different affinities, so using the same 5 champions and having so many cases where weak affinity is going to make a huge difference in clearing those dungeons, I had to take quite a bit of time to figure out which would be the best champions overall to get this done. So what I'm going to do is, if you guys want to see this content where I do the same exact thing, clear every single dungeon on stage 25 with epics only, get this video to 700 likes. I think that is realistic, and I will make that second video happen. Now, I believe the legendary version is going to be, for the most part, easier than the epic version. However, if you have been doing stage 25 dungeons for quite some time, you do know that some of the key champions to clearing all of the dungeons are in fact epics, so I did struggle quite a bit with this. However, once you remove all legendaries from and make this an epic only for a second installment of this video, I do believe it's going to take me double if not triple the amount of time to get this done. So with that being said, let's get right into my thought process and how I built this team. Alright guys, so for the stage 25 same team concept here, I started in Fire Knight, and these are the 5 champions I picked: Mashald, Trunda, Dracomorph, Underpriest Brogni, and finally Tomb Lord. I'm sure you all know how all the mechanics work for the stage 25 dungeons, so you can kind of see how I really only focused on synergizing Fire Knight 25 as well as Spider 25. This was really the key here because these were the 2 most difficult dungeons that were so widely different as far as what I needed here. So when I first started building this, Trunda was going to be the only pick that I was going to use 100% no matter what, because I knew she had the option to AoE HP burn as well as stun, and she could be a nuker and wave clear champion for the other dungeons, so she was a really easy choice. The second easy choice for me was going to be Dracomorph, because even though he is blue affinity, he does have the upper hand for that defense down and weaken ability, not being affected by the affinity strength and weaknesses of all the dungeons, because he isn't hitting the target, it's simply being applied without hitting. After that, I really had to decide how I wanted to approach this. I know Dracomorph had a 4 hit, Trunda has a 2 hit, so that was 6 hits for the Fire Knight. So what was I going to do? How was I going to make sure I was getting a turn without going too fast? That's where Mashald came in. I realized, okay, even if I do get enough hits, there's 0 chance without someone like an Allure, who is an epic, kind of like how I mentioned earlier, how epics were pretty strong in a lot of these dungeons to keep the turn meter always down. I did consider someone like Alessandra, but Mashald has the heal reduction, which is going to be very important because I knew Fire Knight was in fact going to get some turns, as well as an AoE True Fear, which once again does not suffer from weak affinity. So Mashald was the 3rd pick for my team going forward, because AoE CC is extremely strong. Next we have Underpriest Brogni. He was my substitute for a healer. I just figured that if I could get his block debuffs as well as shield up and then extend it, I offered my team a much higher chance of surviving because we are getting some heal effect on top of it when you're hit with the shield. Now after that, the 5th spot was definitely the hardest spot to figure out. I needed someone able to reduce the turn meter properly. I really didn't want to use a Void legendary here. There were definitely tons of Void legendaries that I think I could have used, but I really wanted to showcase this in its truest form and not use Void to just simply override any possible chance of weak affinity or strong affinity. So I ended up going with Tomb Lord with that really strong triple hit. I even put him in Relentless gear, and it's a champion that also offers attack down, which is going to be very crucial because, as we all know, these dungeons hit incredibly hard. Alright, so the first one we're going to watch is going to be the Fire Knight stage 25. I did start this at about a minute in because I figured what happens if I do get it on the first try, and as we can assume from watching this clip, I ended up getting it in the first try here. This one was not as hard as I thought it was going to be. I didn't crit cap all my champions, they're not in the most ideal gear here. This was kind of just a test run, and it happened to work based on the theory I had in mind, based on the gear I already had on these champions here. So you can clearly see we have True Fears, we have Trunda without accuracy. This is the only dungeon I elected not to use accuracy. I just went full damage with Trunda to get some wave clear in, and the Fire Knight was really the part that I was nervous about the most here. Of course, all of these runs are manual. I think it would be a little bit unrealistic to say I could do this with the same rarity of the champions being legendary, make it full auto. I think that was just a little bit beyond my reach as far as the amount of time I wanted to spend on this, even though it did end up taking a decent amount of time. So as we can see here, we took the first hit, no one really in danger of dying. Michelle getting a bit low there, but I wasn't too worried about that. And you can kind of see the process and thought process I was going through here, electing to reduce the turn meter with Tomb Lord when that's a viable option. When it isn't a viable option, the good news is Fire Knight has the lowest amount of health of all the dungeons, so once I got the shield down, I knew I just kind of had to cycle things forward, make sure I got that shield up, make sure I got that block debuff heal up, and if I could extend the shield, great, before the Fire Knight gets a turn and slams. If I couldn't, no worries. The most important things here were applying poison debuffs, extending the shield, and having heal reduction on the Fire Knight to pretty much make this whole process go a lot better for me. As we all know, even though Underpriest Broccoli does reflect damage, it doesn't count towards the shield. If it did, that would be extremely broken and would have made this so much easier. It would have been the obvious choice, even though I did in the end elect going with Underpriest Broccoli. So with all of my decision making in how this was going to play out, and the fact that I manualed it, of course it wasn't going to be as quick. I'm assuming each and every run you see, if I had done this multiple times, gotten comfortable with whose abilities had to go where, without having to think on the spot after repetitions, I probably could have gotten this dungeon specifically, as we can see from the clear time here, which was 5 minutes and 57 seconds. More realistically, it's about 3 to 3.5 minutes if I just quick casted my way all the way through this. As far as MVP for this run, I do honestly believe every single champion here has a place, and I'm going to be curious by the end of this video, once you've seen each and every single dungeon, which champions I could have swapped out and maybe I did miss something, and try to stay along the same lines that I did, where I did not use a single void legendary. So see if you can figure out any other legendary that I could have used in place of any of these champions. Keep in mind affinities for all of the dungeons. We're going to see which affinities each stage 25 does have, but it's quite possible that I missed someone that would have made things a lot easier and a lot cleaner for me, because everyone's going to think the same. There are tons of smart people, especially viewers that I've had, that I've definitely noticed over the past few videos in the comment section. Alright, so the next one we're going to talk about is going to be Spider Stage 25. I wasn't as worried about this, and just like the Fire Knight Stage 25, this is another dungeon that I was able to one-shot straight from the start. I did change Trunda's Masteries as well as gear. Right after this, she's no longer a full-on nuker. She has accuracy, she has a War Master, so there's no more Helm Smasher. I knew we wanted to keep the Spiderlings alive as long as possible. I was a bit worried about the Spider's damage overall. I knew it was going to take a big toll having all those AoEs coming out over and over again. About halfway through this run, I did realize that I was going to have to make a decision whether I was going to spam A1s and really rely on the HP burn and stun from Trunda as well as the True Fear, or if I was going to go for the strategy of, once I do get enough HP burn damage, just start killing the Spiderlings over and over again. As we can see, I did lose Michelle quite early into this fight. This was another decently long one here, but overall it's pretty consistent here. And I do have 2 weak affinity champions, which definitely was a key here, because as we all know, if I cannot apply poisons onto the boss, onto the Spiderlings, they're not going to die. So with that choice that I did make where I wanted to kill the Spiderlings as often as possible, it was a bit detrimental for me to have a weak hit on someone like a Tomb Lord who did end up dying once again throughout this run, finally losing Dracomorph, it coming down to pretty much Brogni and Trunda. They were built well enough to survive, get the last set of AoE, HP burn, and stuns in the champions, and finally the Spider took a turn and it was game, set, match from there. We did that in 5 minutes. Once again, if I was quick casting this, I would expect this run to be around 3 to 3.5 minutes, just like the Fire Knight. So for this test here, I do believe I did get a little bit lucky on this, even though I had mapped it out in my head quite a bit. I wasn't expecting how much damage the Spiderlings were going to do to the weak affinity champions. There were a few crits that were unlucky there, so even after everything added up, I was able to successfully complete stage 25 Spider. Alright, so surprisingly enough, Ice Golem ended up being the most difficult of all the dungeons for me to do. I was a bit worried about the waves because if anybody knows, The Ice Golem stage 25 waves are hands down the hardest in the entire game, so I had to use the CC to my advantage for sure, really praying, and this is where I actually realized that Tomb Lord didn't have the proper accuracy that I wanted, or he just got extremely unlucky, and this was the first dungeon that I failed my first attempt on, so it did take it all the way to attempt number 2 to properly get this going here. So with my knowledge of how difficult these waves are, I did have to take it rather slow and steady, making sure I was precisely calculating which target I wanted to hit in the waves, what each champion did, which really comes in handy, you knowing all of the game knowledge, knowing when you should be critting a Seeker in the second wave here, knowing which target to take the increased defense off of with Mashald, replace that with heal reduction, not that that matters for this specific wave, but pretty much making sure you're CCing the champions and the ones you believe aren't going to fall to the CC, try to A1 them with the Trunda, get that stun off, and finally using Under Priest Brogni's A3 once you do believe they are in fact going to get a turn to mitigate as much possible damage as you can. So now that we've seen that, we do in fact get to the Ice Golem, and this was the scariest part because there aren't any real markers on the Ice Golem showing you exactly when he's going to use that devastating hard-hitting ability at his thresholds. And I think the scariest part about those thresholds is it doesn't affect his turn meter. He's just going to get a turn. If he does it while he's at a full turn meter, you're almost always going to be looking at a wipe unless you have insane survivability, which is clearly not the case here. So the main focus here was going to be making sure True Fear was on both of the ads, getting HP burn onto the ads as much as possible, doing as little damage as possible to the actual Ice Golem himself, unless I was absolutely certain that he was under a threshold. As we can see, at about 70%, maybe a little bit higher than 70% health, I even lose Dracomorph. So now I'm pretty much just 4-manning the Ice Golem stage 25 here, trying to weave the cooldowns as best as I can. As soon as I kill the ad, this is where I'm actively looking to not lower the turn meter anymore, get as much damage onto the Ice Golem, so he does in fact proc that special ability, because with the ads up I have a much higher chance of winning because I can put HP burn on and I don't have to focus the Ice Golem, putting my team at risk to proc that frigid vengeance that, like I just mentioned, and under the right circumstance simply just one-shot your team here. So I did have one unfortunate overlap quite early on into this where I had frigid wins where I had the special attack, then he got a turn. I was a bit worried, but thankfully no one died here. Of course, as I mentioned, it's a weak affinity for two of my champions, being Tomb Lord and Mashald, so that was the main thing I was focused on here, and making sure that I did the best that I possibly could. The rest of this was pretty straightforward. It went rather smooth. I don't believe I hit any hiccups while going through here. There were a few times where it was a little bit interesting getting extra turn procs and me misclicking on the Ice Golem by accident, which is actually why I wiped the first time. I clicked on the Ice Golem with Trunda. She hit the Ice Golem way too hard, Mastery procced, and it triggered that special attack with both ads alive. And at the end here, as you can see, once again, we only have Tomb Lord, Under Priest Brogni, as well as Trunda surviving. And finally, just Trunda and Under Priest Brogni once again, which honestly is to be expected. This one did take quite some time, as we can see, the longest run out of all of them that you will see here today at 8 minutes and 9 seconds. For this dungeon specifically, if I decided to quick cast, it would be around 5 minutes to 5 minutes and 30 or 5 minutes and 40 seconds. So nothing too impressive on that front, besides the fact that this team also works for the other dungeons as well. So this now brings us to the final dungeon, which is Dragon. It is red affinity, so I was a little bit nervous on the waves. I wasn't too worried about the dragon itself. I didn't think there would be an issue there. I did have two very strong champions, being Mashald and Tomb Lord, who are indeed strong affinity. So I was kind of just hoping that I could make all of this up with my original plan of having some of the best champions that don't suffer too much from weak affinity. Trunda has the opportunity to stun, HP burn, the weak affinity there isn't too bad. I didn't use her as a nuker for this dungeon, obviously because weak affinity would have a much worse role than having a CC champion that's weak affinity, because you don't really care about the output, you only really care about the debuffs put on them. And Mashald is a fantastic backup with that True Fear, and as we all know, Dracomorph hits very hard, has a lot of poisons, so extra chances to apply the poisons through weak hits. As far as probability goes for not weak hitting, and the defense down and weaken will never matter as far as weak goes, so it ended up going pretty well and I got through it pretty quickly, but I was very careful which target I was hitting, which target I wasn't, because the Evil Eye Mastery that reduces turn meter on the first A1 usage of the match really came down to it and mattered a lot while I was getting through these trash waves. So after that took about 3 minutes of runtime to get to the dragon, and once I was here I was pretty confident. Outside of the first turn where I resisted the attack down on this champion, I knew the cooldown wouldn't be back up before the dragon did his inhale attack and then did his first real attack on my team. So from here on out I had to play very careful, really think about Under Priest Brogni's skills and cooldowns, and make sure that he had his shield up for the turn that I was going to have to take the first slash of his claws that applies all the debuffs, the attack downs, because those could have been very detrimental to my team if I didn't consider what was going to happen and didn't save that A3 from Under Priest Brogni and A2 ability in unison to make sure I was properly protected here. But outside of that, this dungeon was actually rather easy. I got poisons up, all I had to do was save that block debuff, as well as small shield with shield extension from Under Priest Brogni, and this was pretty much game, set, match here. It did take quite a bit of time, as we're going to see as we go through this. Moving towards the end of the fight and eventually killing it, it ended up taking a total of 5 minutes and 45 seconds, and we got a very nice Ancient Shard here just in time for our 2x Ancient event where I could get an awesome rare to add to my collection or to simply feed for experience. But overall, I think the MVP of this was quite clearly Mashald for the trash waves, and then finally Tomb Lord for the boss itself. However, I cannot dismiss Under Priest Brogni and what he did bring survivability wise. I wasn't initially thinking it would be possible without using a reviver in any of these attempts for one team. However, Under Priest Brogni, as we all know, is extremely strong as a champion, offers so much utility on top of the fact that Masteries can in fact proc when he receives damage or anyone else receives damage while the shield is on them. Alright guys, after going over that, now let's just go over the stats I used. The gear sets I use on all these champions aren't unique at all. It's pretty much just speed gear or full damage gear. With Mashald, we have 37,000 health, 3,000 attack, 2,000 defense, 221 speed, way too much crit rate, decent amount of crit damage, and 344 accuracy. Moving on to Dracomorph tag number 1, 29,000 health, a lot of attack, very little defense, not crit capped because he's for my Infinity Clan Boss team, a lot of crit damage, decent speed, and 252 accuracy. Moving on to Under Priest Brogni, another member of my Clan Boss team, 231 speed, 56,000 health, 3,200 attack, just under 3,000 defense, not crit capped once again, 217 crit damage. Now ideally I should have re-geared my Clan Boss champions to be crit capped. I think it would have been a bit more efficient because I'm used to running my Clan Boss team with Lonicus, who has increased crit rate buff. However, it didn't prove to be too necessary and might have even hurt me in things like the Spider Dungeon as well as Ice Golem for the obvious problems it could have had by doing too much damage there. Now we're going to go over Trunda. So this Trunda here is the Fire Knight Trunda. We have 6.4 thousand attack, 39,000 health, 170 speed, 100 crit rate, 258 crit damage, resistance, accuracy, nothing too crazy. Now moving on to the Trunda I used for the remaining 3 dungeons, 72,000 health, so clearly way different, 252 accuracy, not crit capped, low crit damage, 202 speed, 3,000 defense, and like I said, way lower attack. So this one was definitely my all-purpose Trunda that got me through 3 of the 4 dungeons, so this is definitely going to be the preferred gear set for sure. The next champion we have here is the only one in a special gear set. As mentioned before, Tomb Lord is in Relentless gear, 244 speed, 46,000 health, 2,500 attack, 2,600 defense, not crit cap, that's actually a big problem, 136% crit damage, and 261 accuracy. So those are the champions. None of them are using Helm Smasher, it's all War Master, Giant Slayer, plus the defense tree. None of them are using the offense tree. None of them are using the support tree, besides I believe Trunda is the only one using the support tree to have a chance of extending the duration of HP burn, because I really wasn't sure how this was going to work on Spider, but I was happily surprised for sure. Alright guys, that's going to conclude my video today. Make sure 700 likes if you want to see a version of this using all epic champions clearing stage 25. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and once again, leave a comment, let me know if you could think of any other champion that isn't Void Affinity that can do this faster, more efficient, that would work for every single dungeon and not be punished too much by the affinities at hand. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.